The door bolts on the furnace jammed when the metal swelled. A foreman struck them twice with an iron bar, shouting to be heard over the roar. The fire pit below had been charged since dawn. Charcoal and pitch stacked high, bellows worked in teams until the heat climbed beyond normal work. Guards with cloths over their mouths felt the hair on their arms crisp when they leaned in. On a platform above, a Babylonian officer unrolled a strip of parchment and read the names of 3 officials from Judah. He did not have to read loudly. Everyone knew who they were. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been appointed to provincial posts after the first deportations. They spoke the language, signed orders, checked weights, and were careful with what they said in court. They also kept a line they would not cross. On the plain of Dura, where Nebuchadnezzar had set up a statue high enough to be seen from the road, the king's herald called all ranks to bow when the music started. Pipes, horns, drums, all at once. The crowd moved as a single animal and went to the ground. 3 men stayed standing. At first, it passed as an error. There were many provinces, many dialects, and the sound of the instruments could be missed. But competitors watch what rivals do not do. Chaldean courtiers brought it to the throne as a matter of order. 3 officials had ignored the command that bound the empire. The king sent for them. They were marched in past hammered bronze doors into a hall cooled by water jars. Light from the courtyard fell across polished stone. Nebuchadnezzar sat forward on his seat with the look of a man who had decided on mercy, if it could be taken as obedience. He gave them a second chance. When the instruments sounded again, they would bow to the image. If not, the furnace would be their end, and no god could pull a man from that fire. The 3 answered without asking for a recess. They said the point was not whether the king's fire was hot or whether deliverance was certain. They would not bow. If their God saved them, fine. If not, their answer was the same. The line they would not cross stood where it had stood the first time the pipes played. Anger moves fast in a court where every eye inspects the king's face. Nebuchadnezzar's expression went cold, then red. He ordered the furnace heated beyond its working mark. 7 times, the scribe wrote, which meant as high as the crew could make it. He sent for the strongest guards on the roster and told them to bind the men and throw them in. The 3 were still dressed in the clothes they had worn to the hall: tunics, cloaks, turbans, belts. The cords cut into their wrists as the knotters rushed their work. The heat at the furnace mouth threw a sheet of air that pushed the body backward. The men who carried the prisoners in felt their beards singe and their eyes tear. When they heaved, the blast took them. The guards died on the stones outside, armor plates pinging as the metal flashed and cooled. The 3 fell into the fire. The king stood where he could see the furnace floor through the open mouth between charges. He knew what burned and what blackened. He knew how cloth curled and how skin whitened. This did not look like that. He leaned forward and asked if his officers had thrown 3 men in. They had. He said he saw 4 walking in the heat, unbound, not stumbling. One looked, in the king's words, like a son of the gods. The men nearest him stared into the light and could not shape what they were seeing. Nebuchadnezzar called them by name and told them to come out. There were protocols for everything: petitions, rewards, processions. There were none for calling into a furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out in front of satraps, governors, and captains, who stopped pretending the heat did not bother them. The 3 stood unharmed. Their hair had not curled. Their clothes held color. A steward stepped in close and sniffed. There was no smoke on them. Men who spent their lives around fires knew that nothing left a furnace without the smell of fuel. These had left it without anything a furnace was meant to do. The king's mood turned again, this time with the relief of a man whose power had been checked and who preferred the miracle to the embarrassment of failure. He issued a proclamation. No one in his realm would speak against the god who had brought 3 officials out of heat that high. The language was as blunt as the order that had sent them in. He promised protection and punishment in the same sentence. He promoted the men he had just tried to kill. What came next did not make the papers of the court scribes, but it plays out the same way in every city that runs on rumor. People asked the furnace crew what they had seen and how the king had looked when he saw it. Men brought their sons to the platform during the change of shift to smell the iron and imagine the miracle. In the palace there was the procurement of new grates and the reeving of fresh ropes. In the offices of those 3 officials there were stacks of petitions and road repair budgets and the same daily work they had done before any of this started. The decree traveled with caravans. In cities far away, a man could recite it as proof that an empire as strong as Babylon had admitted a limit to its reach. That was political. The part no courier could carry was the few minutes when 3 men decided they would say the same thing to a king in private that they had told each other in the square. Their answer did not change because the room got brighter or because the stakes were named out loud. They did not ask to stay inside the law and outside obedience at the same time. They accepted the cost. Everyone who heard the story understood that before the heat, there had been a choice. There are details in the old report that fit how furnaces were run. Bellows in teams, foremen counting loads, guards taking turns at the mouth because the radiant heat overwhelms anyone who stands too long beside it. There are the laws of air that say heat rises and hits the men above it first. That may be why the throwers died before the throne. There is the human habit of stacking fuel higher when ordered to make a show. Everything about that morning lines up with how people behave when pride is at stake. The break in the line is the part where the fire does not do what fire does. Years later, scribes would write a list of court events in the rain and leave the furnace to the records of men who cared about the line between obedience and worship. The statue on the plain would get sand-blasted by wind and forgotten by anyone but surveyors. The men who chose not to kneel would not forget the feel of the cords, the shove from behind, the rush of air at the lip when you look down and see the floor shimmering like water. They would not forget the way the king's voice changed when he called to them. They would remember the moment a furnace mouth became a door. For the listeners who want motives, there is enough. A ruler who wanted unity he could see from the palace roof. Administrators who would not trade their loyalty for safety. Courtiers who measured their own ambitions by pointing out others' refusals. For the listeners who want procedure, there is enough. A second chance offered, a sentence announced, an execution ordered by the book. For those who want evidence, there is a court full of witnesses who smelled nothing on the men who had stood in thick smoke. The scene leaves a mark because it holds together without flourishes. The king set an image and backed it with threat. The 3 refused and named their reason. The furnace crew obeyed the order and rode the edge of heat meant for other men. The fire took what it always takes. Then it stopped at a line no one had drawn on the floor. The people who watched did not learn theology. They learned what it looks like when fear does not win a minute that fear should always win. The story continues in small ways. A brick carries a print from a valve wheel. A guard's ring lies in ash somewhere beyond the reach of brooms. An officer remembers tightening a knot around a man who did not pull against the rope. There is no monument on the plain that tells any of that. The monuments are the old words in a report the empire tried, for a while, to keep people from quoting in the wrong places. That 3 men went in bound and came out walking. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.